The worst decisions in a courthouse often happen before the gavel ever falls. They begin the moment someone decides they already know who deserves respect. The marble steps of Franklin County Courthouse reflected the pale glow of an early Monday morning as attorneys hurried through the revolving doors with leather briefcases tucked beneath their arms and clerks balanced stacks of paperwork that would shape lives before sunset. Security officers greeted familiar faces with practiced nods, while television crews prepared outside for what local reporters were already calling the most closely watched judicial hearing of the year. Inside those walls, every signature, every document, and every decision carried weight. Yet only a few people knew that one missing case file could delay the proceeding by weeks. Vanessa Martha climbed the courthouse steps carrying 3 thick bundles of neatly organized court records secured against her chest with both hands. She wore a navy business suit, comfortable low heels, and a simple silver watch that had belonged to her late father, a man who had taught her that dignity was never something another person could take away. The folders she carried contained confidential judicial materials that had been reviewed late into the previous evening and needed to arrive inside Courtroom 4 before 9 o'clock sharp. She walked with quiet confidence, acknowledging a courthouse custodian with a warm smile before continuing toward the security entrance. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance. She looked like another professional beginning another demanding workday. That ordinary impression lasted only a few seconds. Officer Vincent Sanchez noticed her before she reached the metal detector, standing nearly 6 feet tall in a freshly pressed patrol uniform. Vincent had developed a reputation for acting quickly whenever something felt out of place. He believed hesitation created risk, and that instinct rarely failed him. As his eyes settled on the unfamiliar woman carrying stacks of official court files, his expression hardened. He stepped directly into her path, raising one hand. "Ma'am, stop right there." Conversations nearby faded as several people glanced toward the entrance. Vanessa stopped immediately without complaint, carefully adjusting the folders so they would not slip from her hands. "Good morning, officer," she said calmly. "I'm headed inside." Vincent looked at the markings on the folders before returning his attention to her face. "Those are restricted court files," he said firmly. "Where did you get them?" Vanessa answered in the same measured tone. "They're exactly where they're supposed to be." The response only deepened his suspicion. "I'm going to need identification before you take another step." Around them, courthouse employees slowed their pace. A young legal assistant exchanged a concerned glance with a deputy clerk, but neither interrupted. Vanessa shifted the weight of the files slightly, maintaining steady eye contact. "Officer, these documents are time-sensitive. If you'll allow me to continue inside, everything will become clear in just a few moments." Vincent folded his arms. "No, ma'am. That's not how this works." The courthouse entrance seemed unusually quiet despite the growing crowd. Even the distant echo of footsteps across polished stone floors felt muted beneath the rising tension. Vanessa took a slow breath, neither defensive nor impatient. "Please read the identification attached to the top folder before making any assumptions," she said softly. Vincent barely glanced toward the paperwork. His attention remained fixed on the woman standing before him, convinced that experience had already given him the answer. He reached for his radio, completely unaware that nearly everyone inside the building was only minutes away from witnessing a mistake that would change the course of his entire career. 45 minutes earlier, the courthouse had looked entirely different. The grand building stood beneath a clear spring sky while the first rays of sunlight stretched across its white stone columns, casting long shadows over the nearly empty plaza. Delivery trucks rolled slowly past the front entrance. Maintenance workers unlocked side doors, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted from a small cafe across the street where judges, attorneys, and court employees often stopped before beginning another demanding day. Inside, every hallway echoed with quiet preparation instead of public tension. Clerks sorted calendars, bailiffs reviewed courtroom assignments, and administrative assistants checked the final schedules for hearings that would soon fill every courtroom. It was a morning built on routine, precision, and trust because inside a courthouse, every minute mattered. Delayed paperwork could postpone testimony, confuse juries, or force families to wait weeks longer for answers they had already spent months seeking. Vanessa Martha had arrived well before sunrise, just as she did before every major proceeding. She believed that preparation was the first form of respect anyone could show the law. Her office light had been one of the first visible through the courthouse windows as she carefully reviewed each page that would later guide the day's proceedings. Every document had been organized with handwritten notes, color-coded tabs, and carefully placed references that allowed complex legal questions to be answered within seconds. She never rushed her work because she understood that every file represented real people whose futures depended upon careful decisions instead of assumptions. As she placed the final documents into secure folders, she paused for a brief moment beside the window overlooking the city. The streets below were beginning to fill with commuters, each carrying responsibilities of their own. She smiled quietly, remembering something her mentor had once told her during her earliest years on the bench. The law earns public confidence, one fair decision at a time. Those words had stayed with her longer than any award or professional recognition ever could. Across town, Officer Vincent Sanchez was beginning his shift with equal confidence, although his mindset followed a very different path. He prided himself on making fast decisions and trusted his instincts above nearly everything else. His supervisors often complimented his initiative, and over time those compliments had quietly convinced him that hesitation was a weakness rather than wisdom. As he adjusted his uniform in the locker room mirror, another officer joked that today would probably be uneventful because everyone important was focused on the high-profile hearing downtown. Vincent smiled with quiet certainty. He believed that whenever crowds gathered, someone would eventually test the rules. His responsibility, as he saw it, was to stop problems before they could grow larger. Neither Vincent nor Vanessa knew their paths would intersect before the courthouse officially opened its busiest session of the month. One carried confidence built through years of patient discipline. The other carried confidence shaped by quick judgment and unquestioned certainty. Outside, the courthouse continued awakening as reporters assembled cameras near the entrance and courthouse employees streamed toward the front doors carrying laptops, briefcases, and legal files. The morning still appeared calm, orderly, and predictable. Yet beneath that peaceful routine, two very different ideas about authority were moving steadily toward the same front steps, where a single decision made in only a few seconds would quietly reveal the enormous difference between possessing power and understanding how to use it. Vincent lowered his radio, but did not step aside. Instead, he took one deliberate step closer, narrowing the distance between himself and Vanessa until the courthouse entrance seemed to shrink around them. The folders resting securely in her arms bore official seals and neatly printed routing labels, yet he barely looked at them. In his mind, the situation had already been decided long before any evidence could challenge his first impression. Vanessa remained remarkably composed. She adjusted the weight of the files with careful precision, making certain that no document slipped from its place. Her heartbeat had quickened, but years spent inside courtrooms had taught her that calm often revealed more than confrontation ever could. She had watched witnesses lose credibility because emotion overtook reason. She had watched attorneys destroy their own arguments simply by refusing to listen. This morning would be no different. Patience still mattered. "Officer," she said evenly, "these records must reach courtroom before 9 o'clock. Several families have waited months for today's hearing. Delaying these files will affect many people who have done nothing wrong." Vincent folded his hands across his duty belt, his expression unchanged. "That sounds important," he replied, "but everyone has a story. Until I know exactly who you are, these documents are not going anywhere." A few courthouse employees slowed their pace as they entered the lobby. An elderly maintenance supervisor recognized Vanessa immediately. His eyes widened with concern, and he instinctively started toward the entrance before another employee quietly touched his shoulder and shook his head. Neither wanted to interfere with an active police investigation, even though something about the encounter felt deeply unsettling. Imagine standing there, carrying responsibilities that affect countless lives, only to realize that the person blocking your path has already decided your character without asking a single meaningful question. Sometimes the loudest judgment is not spoken with anger. Sometimes it is delivered with absolute certainty. Vanessa reached carefully into the outer pocket of her portfolio without making any sudden movement. "My identification is inside this holder," she explained. "You may examine it if you would like." Vincent immediately raised one hand. "Leave everything exactly where it is." His voice was firm enough that several nearby conversations stopped altogether. The revolving doors continued turning as more attorneys entered the building, but many slowed their pace after noticing the growing crowd near security. Quiet whispers drifted through the marble lobby. No one fully understood what had happened, yet everyone sensed the tension steadily increasing. Vanessa nodded once and withdrew her hand. "Very well," she answered softly. "I will follow your instructions." Her willingness to cooperate should have eased the situation. Instead, Vincent interpreted her calm demeanor as rehearsed confidence. The certainty that had guided him throughout his career became even stronger. He believed he was preventing a serious security breach before it reached the courtroom. Across the lobby, a young judicial clerk checked the large wall clock. 8:49. Less than 11 minutes remained before the morning session would begin. She looked toward another clerk, both silently realizing that the confidential files had not arrived. Inside Courtroom 4, judges, attorneys, jurors, and families were taking their seats, completely unaware that the documents everyone depended upon remained only a few yards away, frozen at the courthouse entrance by a misunderstanding that was becoming more difficult to correct with every passing second. Vanessa glanced briefly toward the hallway leading deeper into the courthouse before returning her attention to Vincent. Her expression never changed. She neither pleaded nor protested. She simply waited, giving him one more opportunity to see what was directly in front of him before the truth introduced itself in a way neither of them would ever forget. The digital clock above the security checkpoint changed to 8:50 as the courthouse lobby grew steadily louder. Lawyers adjusted their ties while clients clutched folders filled with hope and uncertainty. Every few seconds, another set of polished shoes echoed across the marble floor. Yet the small circle forming around Vincent and Vanessa seemed strangely separated from the rhythm of the building. It was as though time inside that space had begun moving differently. Vincent extended his hand toward the stack of folders. "Set them on the inspection table," he instructed. Vanessa carefully placed each file down exactly as requested, aligning the corners with deliberate precision. She handled every document with the same care someone might give to an irreplaceable family photograph. Vincent immediately opened the top folder without asking permission, flipping through pages that meant very little to him. Court schedules, sealed memoranda, judicial correspondence, and administrative routing forms passed before his eyes. He recognized official formatting, but not the significance behind the paperwork. His attention remained focused on proving his suspicion rather than understanding what he was reading. "Interesting collection," he remarked. "These look authentic." Vanessa answered quietly. "Because they are." Her calm reply seemed only to strengthen his determination. He lifted another folder and examined the cover page more closely before placing it aside. "Anyone can carry official-looking documents," he said. "That does not explain why you have them." Nearby, two assistant district attorneys exchanged uncomfortable glances. One recognized Vanessa immediately but hesitated. Interrupting a police officer during an active security stop could easily create additional confusion. They whispered between themselves, uncertain whether someone more senior had already been notified. A court reporter standing beside the elevators noticed the growing crowd and slowly lowered the notebook she had been organizing. Something about the silence surrounding the encounter felt heavier than raised voices ever could. Vanessa folded her hands in front of her. "Officer Sanchez, every minute these files remain here delays proceedings that affect dozens of people. Please look at the authorization sheet clipped inside the first folder." Vincent barely glanced toward the clipped document before shaking his head. "I decide what I need to review." Those words settled over the lobby with surprising weight. Imagine standing in a place built to protect fairness while realizing that procedure itself has quietly been replaced by personal certainty. Sometimes justice is not threatened by loud chaos. Sometimes it is tested by someone who stops asking questions because they believe they already know every answer. Another courthouse employee approached cautiously from the hallway before stopping several yards away. It was Eleanor Brooks, the senior judicial administrator responsible for coordinating courtroom operations throughout the building. She recognized the folders instantly and felt concern rise across her face, but before she could step forward, her office phone vibrated. Courtroom was calling again, asking why the confidential files had not yet arrived. She answered briefly, promising they would be delivered as soon as possible, though she no longer felt confident that promise could be kept. Vincent continued examining Vanessa's belongings with measured confidence, finding nothing unusual except neatly organized legal materials, professional stationery, and a leather portfolio embossed with simple initials. Nothing suggested criminal intent. Nothing confirmed wrongdoing. Yet instead of questioning his original assumption, he interpreted the absence of evidence as proof that he simply had not looked deeply enough. Vanessa watched him without anger. Years inside the justice system had taught her that character revealed itself most clearly when authority faced uncertainty. She could have raised her voice. She could have demanded immediate recognition. Instead, she offered him one final opportunity. "Officer Sanchez," she said with quiet sincerity, "there is still time to resolve this respectfully." Vincent closed the portfolio, looked directly into her eyes, and replied with complete confidence, "That depends entirely on what I discover next." Never realizing that the truth he continued searching for had been resting in plain sight since the very first moment they met, the wall clock advanced to 8:53, and with every passing minute the atmosphere inside the courthouse became noticeably heavier. Courtroom deputies began checking their watches while courtroom clerks quietly stepped into the hallway, searching for answers without drawing attention. Somewhere beyond the lobby, a bailiff announced that the morning session would begin shortly, but the announcement only reminded everyone that something essential was still missing. The confidential files remained on the inspection table beneath Vincent Sanchez's watchful eyes. Vanessa Martha stood beside them with the same composed posture she had maintained from the beginning, refusing to allow frustration to replace professionalism. She understood that emotions could spread through a room faster than facts, and once that happened, restoring order became much more difficult. Across the lobby, Eleanor Brooks ended another telephone call, her concern becoming impossible to hide. She walked a few careful steps toward the security area before stopping again. Her instincts urged her to intervene, yet years of working inside the judicial system had taught her that public confrontations between officials often created larger problems than they solved. She hoped Vincent would notice what had become obvious to nearly everyone else. Instead, he continued reviewing papers one page at a time, searching for confirmation rather than clarity. A deputy clerk quietly leaned toward another employee and whispered, "Has anyone contacted the chief judge?" The question lingered in the air. The other employee gave only a slight shake of the head, unwilling to escalate the situation without certainty. Nearby, two attorneys waiting for the elevator recognized Vanessa immediately. One instinctively started forward to greet her before stopping mid-step after noticing the serious expression on her face. She gave the slightest, almost imperceptible motion with her eyes, silently asking them not to interrupt. They understood. If she was remaining calm, there had to be a reason. Imagine witnessing someone with every opportunity to assert authority, choosing restraint instead. Real confidence rarely demands attention. It waits patiently, allowing others every chance to reveal who they truly are. Vincent finally lifted the first folder once again, this time noticing a sealed authorization envelope attached beneath the cover sheet. Printed across the front in bold letters were the words "Judicial Administration Office." His fingers paused for the briefest moment before he frowned. Rather than opening the envelope, he set it aside. "This could have been prepared by anyone," he said, speaking more to himself than to Vanessa. She answered quietly, "Or it could contain exactly the information you have been asking for." Her voice remained steady, carrying neither sarcasm nor irritation. The simplicity of her response unsettled several people standing nearby, because they could hear the opportunity she was still offering. Vincent only needed to look. He only needed to ask one more question. He only needed to consider that his first impression might not tell the entire story. Instead, he folded his arms once more. "Until everything is verified, these files stay here." At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the lobby. Several senior court officials stepped out, speaking quietly among themselves as they headed toward Courtroom 4. One of them glanced toward the gathering near security and immediately slowed. Another looked directly at Vanessa before exchanging a puzzled expression with his colleague. Neither hurried forward. Neither called out her name. They simply watched, realizing they had arrived at the final moments of a misunderstanding that was becoming impossible to reverse. Vanessa noticed them from the corner of her eye, but did not acknowledge their presence. She remained focused entirely on Vincent, giving him one final opportunity to recognize the truth through his own judgment rather than someone else's intervention. The courthouse itself seemed to fall into an uneasy silence, as though the entire building were holding its breath, waiting to see whether wisdom would arrive before someone with unquestionable authority did. The clock reached 8:57, and an almost imperceptible shift moved through the courthouse. The whispers that had filled the lobby moments earlier began to disappear, replaced by the quiet awareness that something significant was unfolding. Every experienced courthouse employee recognized that silence. It was the silence that arrived just before an important proceeding began, when every person understood that even the smallest decision could carry lasting consequences. Vanessa Martha stood exactly where she had been instructed, her hands resting calmly beside the inspection table, while the confidential files remained untouched. She did not glance toward the growing audience or acknowledge the senior officials now watching from across the lobby. Instead, she continued treating Vincent Sanchez with the same professional courtesy she had shown from the beginning. It was not because she lacked authority. It was because she believed authority revealed its greatest strength through discipline rather than display. Few people inside the building knew the full extent of her responsibilities. Although the public recognized the chief judge as the visible face of the courthouse, those working within the judicial system understood that Judge Vanessa Martha served as the supervising judge assigned to oversee courtroom administration, judicial compliance, procedural integrity, and the conduct of court operations throughout the district. Before major proceedings, every courtroom schedule, every confidential filing, and every administrative protocol ultimately passed under her supervision. The files resting on the inspection table were not ordinary paperwork. They contained judicial assignments, sealed scheduling directives, procedural memoranda, and confidential materials authorized for that morning's proceedings. Delaying them risked disrupting not merely one hearing, but the coordinated work of multiple courtrooms. Yet none of that changed Vanessa's expression. She believed respect for the law meant respecting the process, even when the process became uncomfortable. Across the lobby, Eleanor Brooks quietly approached one of the senior court administrators who had just arrived from the elevator. She spoke only a few words before handing him a printed schedule. His eyes moved from the paper toward Vanessa, then toward Vincent. A subtle look of disbelief crossed his face before he nodded once. Neither official interrupted. Both understood that the next decision belonged entirely to the officer standing at the inspection table. Imagine being given every opportunity to reconsider your judgment, every opportunity to ask one more question, every opportunity to notice the truth sitting only a few inches away, yet remaining convinced that certainty is the same as wisdom. Sometimes people do not fail because they lack information. They fail because they stop looking for it. Vincent picked up the sealed authorization envelope once again. This time he noticed the embossed judicial seal pressed into the heavy, cream-colored paper. The signature line carried the initials of the chief judge himself, authorizing direct delivery to Courtroom 4 under the supervision of Judge Vanessa Martha. His eyes paused briefly before moving away. Rather than opening the envelope immediately, he looked back toward Vanessa as though expecting her composure to finally break. It never did. "You have remained unusually calm through all of this," he observed. Vanessa offered a faint, respectful smile. Experience teaches people that remaining calm allows the truth to arrive on its own schedule. Her answer lingered in the air long after she finished speaking. Nearby, several courthouse employees exchanged quiet glances. They had heard Vanessa use similar words during judicial training seminars for new magistrates and courtroom staff. Recognition spread silently across their faces, but no one spoke. They understood that the moment of explanation was now only seconds away. At the far end of the hallway, the large wooden doors leading into Courtroom 4 slowly opened. Conversation stopped. Staff members instinctively straightened their posture. The atmosphere throughout the courthouse changed with remarkable speed, not because someone had raised a voice, but because the people who knew exactly who Vanessa Martha was had finally begun walking toward the lobby. The heavy wooden doors at the end of the corridor opened with quiet precision, and every conversation inside the lobby came to an immediate stop. The sound was not loud, yet it carried the unmistakable authority of a courtroom preparing to begin. Senior attorneys gathered their files. Bailiffs straightened their jackets. Administrative staff instinctively stepped aside to clear the center walkway. Vincent Sanchez noticed the sudden change, but assumed it was simply the normal routine before an important hearing. He remained standing beside the inspection table, still convinced he was protecting the courthouse. Then the chief judge appeared. Walking beside him were 2 appellate judges, the court administrator, and several senior judicial officials. Their pace was steady, their expressions professional, but the moment the chief judge's eyes reached the security checkpoint, he stopped. The officials beside him stopped as well. For one brief second, the entire lobby seemed suspended in silence. The chief judge looked directly at Vanessa Martha, and a warm expression replaced the concern on his face. "Good morning, Judge Martha," he said clearly enough for every person nearby to hear. "We have been waiting for you. The court cannot begin without those files." The words echoed through the marble lobby with extraordinary force, not because they were spoken loudly, but because they instantly transformed everything people believed they understood only moments before. Vincent did not move. His eyes shifted from the chief judge to Vanessa, and then slowly toward the folders resting on the inspection table. Around him, courthouse employees lowered their heads almost instinctively, realizing the misunderstanding had finally reached its unavoidable conclusion. The assistant district attorneys, who had remained silent, exchanged knowing glances. Eleanor Brooks quietly closed her notebook, relief washing across her face. Vanessa offered the chief judge a respectful nod. "Good morning, Your Honor," she replied calmly. "I apologize for the delay. There appears to have been a misunderstanding during the security process." She spoke without accusation, without embarrassment, and without the slightest hint of anger. Her composure somehow made the moment even more powerful. Imagine expecting someone to expose your mistake with humiliation, only to discover they choose dignity instead. Sometimes the greatest display of authority is refusing to use another person's lowest moment as your highest victory. The chief judge looked toward Vincent with measured curiosity rather than immediate judgment. "Officer," he said evenly, "Judge Martha serves as the supervising judge for courthouse operations. Those documents were personally authorized through my office for today's proceedings." Vincent felt the certainty that had guided every decision that morning quietly disappear. His attention returned to the sealed authorization envelope, still resting exactly where Vanessa had asked him to look several minutes earlier. He carefully picked it up, broke the seal, and unfolded the official letter inside. The first line confirmed everything she had patiently tried to tell him. Her full name appeared beneath the court seal, followed by her title and direct authorization to transport the confidential materials to Courtroom 4 before the morning hearing. Every question he had insisted on answering had already been answered inside the very document he repeatedly chose not to read. The realization settled over him with remarkable clarity. Vanessa had never resisted his instructions. She had never argued. She had never attempted to use her position to avoid scrutiny. Instead, she had given him every reasonable opportunity to discover the truth through proper procedure. Around the lobby, the silence remained complete. No one whispered. No one celebrated. They simply watched as Vincent slowly lifted his eyes toward the woman he had spent the entire morning evaluating, only now understanding that she had quietly been evaluating something far more important than his investigation. She had been watching how he exercised authority when he believed no one above him was looking. No one spoke for several long seconds. The courthouse lobby, which had been filled with hurried footsteps only moments before, now stood in complete silence. Vincent Sanchez slowly lowered the authorization letter back onto the inspection table, his confidence replaced by the unmistakable weight of understanding. The official court seal, Judge Vanessa Martha's title, and the chief judge's signature had been in front of him all along. Nothing had been hidden. Nothing had been misleading. The truth had simply required the willingness to look before reaching a conclusion. The chief judge stepped closer, his voice remaining calm and measured. Officer Sanchez, courthouse security is essential, and careful attention protects everyone who enters this building. But careful attention must always be matched with careful judgment. His words carried neither anger nor ridicule. They sounded more like a lesson than a reprimand. Vanessa gently gathered the confidential files, carefully straightening each folder before securing them once again in her arms. She checked the documents one final time to ensure every page remained in perfect order. Only after confirming that nothing had been misplaced did she look toward Vincent. He met her eyes for only a brief moment before lowering his gaze again. "Judge Martha," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I allowed my assumptions to guide my decisions before I allowed the facts to do the same." Vanessa listened without interrupting. Around them, courthouse employees remained respectfully still, understanding that this conversation carried meaning far beyond one mistaken encounter. She finally answered in the same calm voice she had maintained throughout the morning. "Officer Sanchez, every person who serves the public will make mistakes. The question is never whether mistakes happen. The question is whether we learn enough from them to serve the next person more fairly." Those simple words settled across the lobby more powerfully than any raised voice ever could. Imagine hearing compassion at the exact moment you expected condemnation. It is often easier to defend yourself against anger than against grace. Grace leaves no room for excuses. The chief judge nodded slightly before addressing the surrounding staff. "Court will proceed as scheduled." With those 4 words, the building seemed to breathe again. Clerks resumed walking toward their assigned courtrooms. Attorneys collected their legal pads. Bailiffs reopened the courtroom doors. The familiar rhythm of the courthouse slowly returned, but the atmosphere had changed. People would remember what they had witnessed that morning long after the hearing itself had ended. Before turning toward courtroom 4, Vanessa paused beside Vincent one final time. "There is one more responsibility I would like you to carry out today," she said. Vincent looked up, surprised. "Yes, Your Honor." She gestured toward the inspection table. "Please complete an incident report exactly as the events occurred. Include every decision that was made, every document that was presented, and every opportunity offered to verify the facts. Accuracy protects everyone, including you." Vincent nodded immediately. "I will." There was no argument left in his voice, only sincerity. Vanessa offered a respectful nod in return before walking toward the courtroom entrance with quiet confidence, the confidential files once again resting securely in her arms. As she passed through the hallway, courthouse employees greeted her with the same respect they had shown for years, but she acknowledged each person exactly as she always had, never allowing rank to become distance. Behind her, Vincent remained standing beside the now empty inspection table, watching the courthouse return to its ordinary rhythm while realizing that the most important lesson of his career had not come from a training manual or a policy handbook. It had come from the quiet dignity of someone who understood that true authority never needs to announce itself because it is recognized by the fairness with which it treats every person who stands before it. The courtroom doors closed softly behind Judge Vanessa Martha as the morning session finally began. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting warm bands of light across polished wooden benches where families, attorneys, jurors, and reporters waited for the proceedings to unfold. To everyone seated inside, the hearing appeared to begin exactly on schedule. Only a handful of people knew how close the entire morning had come to unraveling before it ever started. Vanessa placed the confidential files before the chief judge with the same steady hands that had carried them through the unexpected delay. She took her seat without drawing attention to herself, reviewed the docket one final time, and quietly nodded that the court was ready. There was no mention of the incident at the entrance. No dramatic annoncement. No public correction. Justice, she believed, should never become a performance. Outside the courtroom, Vincent Sanchez remained at the security station, completing the incident report exactly as instructed. Every sentence forced him to revisit the choices he had made. He documented each question he had asked, every opportunity he had declined to verify the authorization documents, and every moment Judge Martha had responded with patience instead of hostility. For the first time since joining law enforcement, he realized that professionalism was measured not only by the willingness to act, but by the willingness to pause before acting. When he finished writing, he read the report twice before signing his name. There were no excuses on the page, only facts. Later that afternoon, the chief judge briefly met with Vincent in a private office. The conversation was respectful but direct. Additional training on procedural verification, impartial decision-making, and courthouse protocol would follow. The purpose was not punishment for its own sake, but strengthening the public trust placed in every officer serving inside the judicial system. Vincent accepted every recommendation without objection because he understood that accountability was not the end of a career. It was an opportunity to rebuild it. As the courthouse gradually emptied and the evening sun settled behind the skyline, Vanessa gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. Passing through the lobby, she noticed Vincent standing near the entrance, assisting an elderly visitor who seemed uncertain about where to find a records office. This time, instead of assuming, he asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully, and personally walked the visitor to the correct hallway before returning to his post. Vanessa watched quietly for a moment before continuing toward the exit with a faint smile. People rarely changed because they were embarrassed. They changed because someone chose to teach instead of humiliate. Imagine how different our communities would become if every position of authority remembered that respect is never earned by suspicion alone. It is earned through fairness, patience, and the courage to let facts speak before assumptions do. Weeks later, courthouse employees still remembered that remarkable morning, but they rarely spoke about titles or positions. Instead, they remembered the composure of a woman who never used power to elevate herself and the humility of a man who accepted responsibility when the truth became impossible to deny. Those memories quietly shaped the culture of the courthouse long after the headlines had moved on. Every person who entered those marble doors afterward was greeted with a little more patience, a little more care, and a little more understanding than before. The building itself had not changed. The laws had not changed. The uniforms and judicial robes remained exactly the same. What changed was the reminder that justice begins long before a judge enters the courtroom. It begins with the choices ordinary people make when they meet someone they have never seen before. Because the strongest authority is never the loudest voice in the room. It is the quiet character that treats every stranger with equal dignity before knowing their name, their title, or the power they may carry. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of justice.